The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the joint session of Finance Committee and Select Board for budget reviews of 2022 budget. Today is March 25th. Meeting starts at 7. We start with Pledge of Allegiance and go to the meeting. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Before we kick the meeting off, I want to remind you that this meeting is broadcasted for public audience and will be available recorded on Westford Cat and other official channels. If you have any questions or any thing you want to say, you can type it in the questions and answers box, which will be monitored throughout the meeting. Having said that, let me pull up the agenda.
Hari?
Yes.
I'm sorry, just real quickly. If you can just remind people to mute themselves when they're not speaking and when the papers are shuffling and stuff, it will help.
Just to everyone, if you are not speaking, I would appreciate if you go on mute. That will ensure smooth proceedings of the meeting. My words. Okay. Does anyone have anything for the open forum that is not posted in the agenda for the joint meeting of Finance Committee and Select Board? We pause for a few seconds there. Okay, that's long enough. Let's move to the agenda item that 705, old business, continue discussion regarding purchase of the hybrid police cruisers for FY22. Who is, I see a docket that's a memo from town manager. Who is starting the discussion on it?
I think Mark can speak to it.
Mark Cost, right? Okay. So after completing all the research and seeing where we're going to stand with the insurance recovery balance, it looks like that the revised additional funds that would be needed for the purchase of the hybrid cruisers would be $17,750.05. The insurance recovery fund is going to be needed to fund the difference of cruisers this year. That was because of the upgrade to the body style. We need to purchase more equipment. Normally, some of it will transfer over, so the cost obviously increased for this year. Most of that was just because of budget timing with how early we do our budget, and then the new body style last year, the estimate we had was not nearly accurate enough with the upfit. So that did leave us scrambling for this year, which does impact the upcoming year. So I did get together with Dan and we spoke with Eric, who looked into grant opportunities. Dan, obviously, Mr. Finance Wizard. The grant opportunities that we were able to locate were primarily for all electric vehicles. And right now, they do not make a vehicle that's all electric on the state bid through procurement that we would be able to use. They do have them for administrative cars, but that's not what we need right now. We need line cars. So the best option then is the Ford SUV hybrid that we discussed last week. So each cruiser is about $3,200 more to upfit, and that's strictly just based upon the cost of the hybrid cruiser. The same equipment will fit into it. We have to make no adjustments for our equipment cost. So it's just straight purchase cost that the difference is going to be. We do anticipate if we are able to purchase the 3 hybrid cruisers, we do anticipate that we will be able to have some fuel savings this year. However, the full realization of that savings will not happen until fiscal 23, mainly because we won't even get these cruisers probably until this time next year. Similar to what we've had happen this year, we submit our order in July and we get the cruisers sometime in February or March. So obviously there's a long lag time, but when you do this through the state bid, they prioritize. So departments that have large orders usually get the first cruisers, and then they kind of filter us in as they go. And this has been kind of consistent over the past few years. So we just had our first cruiser start getting switched over this week for our fiscal 21 purchases. So if this is funded for this year, come July, we will put in the order, and we should have them road ready come February or March. So the difference is the 17,750.
Okay.
Any questions?
Christina?
Hi, thanks for doing all that work, you guys. I really appreciate it. So I'm sort of in favor. I'm in favor of finding that 17,000 and going ahead with the hybrids for 22. So I don't know how, if Dan or Jody have an idea of where that money can come from.
Okay. Dan, Jody?
Well, I think what we're hearing is that the federal money we're supposed to be getting is going to be allowed to replace revenue. So if that's the case, when we finally get the document, we certainly could use that towards that purchase. We could use Fincome Reserve. We could use capital stabilization. I mean, there's lots of different things. We could do a transfer in May or June. Well, but that's for this fiscal year, so never mind, that wouldn't work. But you know, there's different ways we could fund this if it's important to you. And we can also continue to apply for grants. You know, perhaps Green Communities might cover it, or other grants. So I think there's options.
So I have a question. So we're talking about 3 vehicles, right? So we continue to look for money, and if we get 5,000, we can move one of them into hybrid. If we get 10,000, we get 2 of them into hybrid. Is that something that works as well? Instead of all or nothing, we can, based on the amount of grant money or amount of money we can find, we can move partial set of vehicles from traditional to hybrid? Mark and Jody.
And so my only comment to that was we would need to know that relatively early in the process. So beginning of July, we would need to know what is available for funding because of our order and the way that the manufacturer and distributors prioritize. It's very difficult to change your order once it's been made. So that's it would complicate things greatly not knowing where we're at.
Well, you can always draw a line on the sand saying that if you don't do this, if you don't confirm this by this date, the default is we'll go with traditional, right?
Yeah, well, that would have to be in July because they only order a certain amount of cruisers. They do have a certain stockpile, but I mean, I could always ask that particular question, but when I asked our cruiser maintenance officer, it seems like it's an act of Congress to be able to move anything through those municipal orders.
Literally.
Okay, John and then Christina.
Refresh my memory. What's the payback time for getting the hybrid versus the normal cruiser? As far as you say you will save X amount of money in fuel over a year. What's the lifetime of this cruiser, and then what's the payback time where it really is advantageous to the town?
Dan.
So the payback time, we had a little analysis in here where we're going to save about $5,700 over the first 12 months. So, for that, $3,200 cost per cruiser, it's around 7 months or so. You break even.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Christina, do you have anything?
Go ahead, Mark. Mark can go.
Mark.
Yeah. So with that, if you get them in March, so it's March, April, May, June, July, that would suggest that they'd almost pay for themselves close in that first year. So I don't think the incremental budget impact in 22 would be 17. It would be 17 less however much fuel you would save in the 4 or 5 months in which you'd have them. So I think if I understand that correctly, we may be looking at maybe 10,000 or something like that for the 3 vehicles. Is that right?
Mark or Dan?
Yeah, if we get them around the end of March next year, I mean, we could save $4,000 or $5,000. So yes, that number could be reduced to 13,000 or so, but it all depends on timing and when we actually receive them.
Okay. Andrea.
Oops, I had to unmute myself.
Yeah, now you're good.
Following up also on Mark, we would start to get some payback during FY22, but also I want to revert back to policy and to what we heard from town meeting this past fall, and to the resolution that was passed, which is that we do have a directive from the town to start to look at ways that we become more energy efficient and that we decrease our carbon footprint. And I think that this is a way to start to do that. I believe that, even if it were a full $17,750.05 deficit, that we could find a way to cover that deficit from the various ways that Jody mentioned earlier. So, speaking personally, and the select board has not discussed this or taken a position on it, but just speaking personally, I think that this really is something that we should pursue and that we should start to take concrete steps to do what town meeting has directed us to do, and to really start to decrease our carbon footprint. And I think this is a good place to start. So I would be in favor of going forward with the 3 hybrid vehicles.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Tom and then John.
Just so along that line, I guess Jody put forward a proposal that when we have a little bit better understanding about the federal money, that we review this. I guess just to close out this issue, if there is strong support in pursuing the hybrid vehicles, do we tag this issue and then it comes back when we're sort of making final reconciliation? What's the best way for us to revisit this?
Go ahead, Jody.
Yeah, we definitely need to have the appropriation before we buy the vehicles. So what I would say is we'll make note, this is your feeling, as we get further in the budget process and we understand what we can spend that money, then we do so. And of course, we'll always try to reduce other budgets or apply for funding, but we can't purchase them without an appropriation. So I've stayed out of jail this long. I'd like to continue that.
John?
Yeah, well, I'm in favor of it also. What does FY21 look like right now as far as when we get toward the end of the fiscal year? Would there be any chance or any way we could use any money if we have some breathing room at the end of the fiscal year 21?
You can't use 21 money for 22 purchase, John. And the cruisers are not in capital. We took it out of capital several years ago because we didn't feel it was capital. So I'm pretty confident in our size budget. We can make this happen as long as we have the commitment.
Okay, so I think any other questions or anything? Otherwise, I think the trend is both boards are leaning towards looking for any place where we can get the additional money to get that, and Jody is going to work her magic to see what we can do. I believe in magic. Okay. If there is no other discussion, we can conclude the hybrid police cruisers discussion.
I just had one thing, Hari.
Go ahead, Christina.
Jody, do you need a vote from us at all, or is this enough?
I always like a vote.
Motion to approve.
Okay, so let me vote. Let me vote the motion, right? The Mark and Andre, please help me. The motion would be to recommend looking for money to purchase the hybrid vehicles in supporting the Greener Initiative charter given to us by the town in the last town meeting.
That sounds good.
Okay. Second.
Okay, let's get to the Fincome vote. Christina?
Yes.
Beth?
Yes.
Myself, yes. And Levi?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And Jake?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Okay. Andrea? I can roll call.
Yeah, Ari, you forgot one.
Sorry, Dennis.
Aye.
Okay.
Hari, I just need somebody from the select board to make the same motion, okay, before you roll call. So is there a motion?
So moved.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to go Mark.
Yes.
Anita.
Aye.
And Scott.
Aye.
Tom.
Aye.
Andrea.
Aye.
Okay. There you go, Jody. Okay, so moving on to review of FY22 budgets for
By the way,
education.
thanks, Mark. Appreciate all the work.
Hi, thank you for having me, and I appreciate the support. We'll figure it out.
Hey, Bill, welcome. We will move on to the 715 budget agenda of WPS. I believe Bill is going to set a stage up by giving a brief overview or presentation, and then we can start our review process. We can't hear you, Bill.
First of all, thank you for the very thorough review that you have done of our budget. And we appreciated the excellent questions because it allowed us to provide you with, as much information to this point in time as we can. So, Dan, if you're running the slides, if I can just have the next slide, I'm just going to go through these very quickly. First of all, I'm very pleased to say that we're able to meet the town manager's appropriation level from the general fund for fiscal 22. We've been able to do that by establishing strong priorities. I and other administrators and the school committee have had much involvement in establishing the priorities for fiscal 22. We referred to our strategic plan. The school committee established some priorities. We talked with the leadership team, the staff. We met with the staff at all grade levels. I had 2 listening sessions with families and residents of the community. I looked at all of these various school improvement plans, extracted some of the discussions that we've had in the Town and School Safety Task Force in terms of looking at priorities, also with our COVID Advisory Committee and our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team. And so the priorities that we established for 22 that we have addressed in the budget are class size, maintaining that guideline of reasonable class size at the elementary and secondary levels and middle school. Addressing social emotional wellness issues, which are of an increasing nature in the school system every year. Doing a better job at elevating our level of cultural competence in the school system and providing materials, not only in the classroom, but in the libraries that offer more diverse authors and diverse topics and content. We want to maintain, very importantly, it began this year, the technology support, because we have a large number of devices throughout the school system. And we want to continue to responsibly maintain our facilities, maintain the health and safety standards. We have heard repeatedly from our staff throughout this current year how pleased they are at the extent to which we have provided safe and healthy work conditions for them. Many of them live in other communities and have said it's in excess of school systems elsewhere. So Dan? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. I'm pleased to say that we're able to maintain our reasonable class sizes at all grade levels. We will be readjusting some numbers at the elementary level that occurs every year as a larger class comes into a particular grade level that may have had a smaller class or vice versa. So that involves some shifting of staff either within a particular school or between schools. But we don't, at this point in time, anticipate losing any staff. As you know, we reduced our staff last year significantly as a reduction in force method to address the decline in enrollment. We're addressing the social emotional wellness with 2.5 adjustment councils being requested. Now, they're the Student Opportunity Act monies, the additional state aid that has come in from the state, along with some of the elementary and secondary school emergency response funds, the ESSER 2 funds, have been appropriated to allow us to hire and place those positions in the budget. Dan? In terms of addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're just touching the tip of the iceberg here. We have $25,000 budgeted for new materials, both for classrooms and libraries, and $3,000 budgeted for consultants to come in and discuss with us issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. This year, we had to hire an additional technician. A technician assistant. And that is because of the large number of devices and the modes of instruction that we've had this year. We have 2 assistant technicians that are doing an outstanding job, and they have both saved multiple times their salaries, and we're looking to elevate them to full-time status. Okay. Dan? Special education is always a budget driver, as you know. We deal with federal and state mandates. We have had to add, actually this year, 0.4 school psychologists. That there should be a note next to that. That has been added this year. We need to recognize it financially in the 22 budget. We need an additional teacher for the autism program. We have a special education teacher that we need at the Robinson. That has been a need for the past year. We have a special education teacher that we're going to be needing at Westford Academy, an additional one because of increasing numbers. We are having to hire a licensed practical nurse to accompany a child who was very medically involved at the middle school And that nurse has to be with the child at all times, both in transportation and during the school day. We also need to hire a 0.8 full-time equivalency, LPN, to address the state's requirement on a statute that is called the Delegation of the Administration of Medication. School systems have to have a certain number of nurses per students. We do not meet that at the high school in particular. And unless we receive a waiver, and I'm not sure if that's possible, we will have to hire this person. If we do receive a waiver, we will be able to eliminate this position from our budget request. We've had to hire a 0.4 occupational therapist for this year and a 0.3 full-time equivalency speech pathologist this year. All signs that our special education numbers are increasing. The severity of issues with students is increasing, but we are still below the average in terms of percentage of special education students to the general student population. Dan? We've added $115,000 in maintenance funds to attempt to engage in more preventive measures than just corrective measures. As you know, our maintenance budget has been in the red for probably 25 years, and we have not been able to budget more commensurate with the need. What has helped us this year is a reset of our salary base because of the RIF, the reduction in force, okay, coming into this year, along with some federal and state funds. And so that has allowed us to have a little bit more flexibility with our general fund revenues. Dan? You know, we're reliant, like most other school systems, on fees. These are the fees that we have proposed and the school committee has approved for fiscal 2022. The only fee that has changed is the transportation fee. Now, that was scheduled to be $325 for this year. It will be $350 next year with a family cap of $850 for those families that have 3 or more students. And currently there are about 50 to 55 families that fall into that category. So Dan? Just wanted to give you a profile because oftentimes people ask, well, does the fee cover the entire cost of bus transportation? This is a graph that shows the red line shows the average cost per rider. Now you see it dips in FY20 and into 21 because we've had lower riders this year. But I want to make sure the parents know that the blue line represents the percentage of bus fees that are covered, percentage of bus transportation costs that are covered by fees. And that turns out to be about 41.6%. The remaining 58.4% is covered in the general fund. So keep it almost a 60-40 split. So for every dollar, about $1.60 of the general fund covers the transportation cost, about 40 cents of fees covers the transportation cost. Okay? So here's a breakdown of how we've managed to fund our budget for fiscal 2022. If you see the general fund of 62,099, that is the town manager's appropriation increase to us. The $2,020,000 is the circuit breaker. We have $1.9 million and almost $2 million in revolving funds. Now, keeping in mind, those revolving funds can only be used for the purpose for which they are intended and for which the monies are collected. We have the IDEA grant, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That is the largest federally funded grant going to special education. We've used that in a different manner this year, which I will explain to you as we go through tonight. We've used the $345,000 in school choice monies. We have applied $271,000 in the ESSER 2 monies. That's the federal monies that come in to local school systems. The ESSER 3 monies are just being released at about this time, and we'll know more about that shortly. But keep in mind, this is the elementary and secondary school education funds. In the 137,580 is the Student Opportunity Act funds. That is the additional state aid that we received this year. We had to make an application for that. And all of that is going to the guidance of the adjustment councils, that we budgeted. So about almost 92% of our budget is supported by the general fund, with about 8% supported by these alternative revenue sources. Dan? I don't need to go through these with you, but this is for your information in terms of where the federal grant monies, the 271,511, and the Student Opportunity Act money, the ESSER 2 is federal money, the Student Opportunity Act money is state money, where you'll find those monies applied in our budget. Okay, and that's just for information. Dan? So how did we close the gap that we had? We had about a $441,000 gap originally when we were considering the four-tier busing. When we took four-tier busing off the agenda and maintained the current school start times for next year, that increased our gap to by $444,000. So if you looked at restoring the school start times for next year, because we had to take the four-tier busing savings out of the budget. And if you take a look at what we were short of Jody's original town appropriation, we were short by over $440,000. That totaled almost $890,000. So we've been able to close the gap we closed it with the ESSER 2 funds that you saw in the prior slide, with the Student Opportunity Act monies, the $137,580. Those were on the previous slide. Now, Kerry has taken and combined a couple of the coordinator positions. We've had a resignation, and we have a person who is out on a leave next year. And we have been able to save $60,000 by consolidating those two positions into a STEM coordinator. We've combined the science and the math coordinators at grades 6 through 12. Jody has had some money in the budget for the last year or so to apply towards a joint facilities operations supervisor. That person would work between the town and the schools and would be sort of an up close and personal, boots on the ground type of person, supervising jobs, really a person out in the field every day, whether it's school department matters or town matters. So the new version of Richie Crocker, who was with us for many years. And so we were able to reduce, we were carrying a full salary in our budget, we were able to reduce that by $40,000. With the increase in bus fees, we anticipate about a $55,000 increase that is used to offset the cost of transportation. I was able to negotiate down the school bus daily rate from $409 per vehicle per day to $395 per vehicle per day with the bus company. Now, I was able to do that because they were the only bidder. Okay, if you have more than one bidder, you are not able to do this. You are not able to conduct any negotiated rate change in transportation contracts at any point in time. And so we have saved $162,000 by going from $409 per vehicle per day to $395. Now, the average, I've done an average benchmarking of a number of communities. The average is about $399 per day. So we're right in that ballpark for three-tier system. Courtney Moran, our Director of Pupil Services, had requested some money for testing and some professional development money for people to be trained in the Orton-Gillingham reading program. She has since been notified in the last 2 weeks that there is a state grant that has been restored for the first time since fiscal 2017 to communities. And so we're able to use that money to offset the $13,695 request. And to piece it together, at the end is the $148,586 of additional school choice monies. This is on top of the $167,000 that we had already applied as an offset to the FY22 budget. Okay, Dan? The last 2 pages, quite honestly, are just for your information. Also, it's a summary by state function. As you know, this is the state function codes that we are required to use by the Department of Education, part of the Chart of Accounts. Okay, so there's 2 pages here. Dan, you can scroll right through the end. So you see the 62. Whoops. Okay. The 62,099, 287. Well, that's 1.4%. But if you add the Student Opportunity Act, which the town manager has done, that brings us up to a 1.62% increase. And you can see in the next column, we're using about $5.6 million in other revenues. This is not unusual. It's a little bit higher than in prior years, but it's because the town's revenue picture is difficult. We all know that. And so we're having to dip into some other funds. Fortunately, the ESSER 2 grants and the Student Opportunity Funds have helped us greatly. So Dan, just as another benchmark, the very last slide, and then I'll stop talking. We'll be glad to answer questions. This is a breakdown of a comparison of expenditures by various state function classifications that the state uses in terms of establishing a school systems foundation budget. And so the red is the state average, the blue is Westford. You can see that down towards the bottom, we spend more than the state, certainly on teaching services. Yes, the amount of money does matter that a community has to spend on education and all other departments, but it's also very much a function of how you spend the money and not wasting it, putting it to good use and targeting it for direct student services to the greatest extent possible. Sometimes the question is asked, are we top heavy with administrators? Well, you can see down at the very bottom, the state percentage is 3.2, ours is 2.4. There are some school systems that have 3, 4, and 5 administrators in program areas that we have 1. And we try to maintain that and put most of our money to direct services to students. So I'm going to stop talking with that, and I'll be glad. And I have Dr. Carrie Cleary, our Assistant Superintendent, Courtney Moran, our Director of Pupil Services, and Jean Savoy, our Interim Director of Finance. Some of you may remember Jean. Jean is the retired school business official from the Neshoba Valley Technical High School. And when Ingrid Nielsen decided to take a job in the Harvard Public Schools, I called Jean, and she was excited to join us. And she's been a great addition, and she'll be with us through the end of this school year.
Okay. Thank you, Bill, for the presentation and the information. So just as a matter of interest to people who are watching as well as will be reviewing later, there's plenty of questions sent by Finance Committee and other boards that are available online is a meeting packet for today's meeting. So anybody want to go first? Wow. Okay, Tom and Christina.
Well, a couple of thank yous. So you mentioned already, Bill, but on behalf of everyone who's working on the Town and School Safety Task Force, one of the top recommendations emerging was for additional social emotional welfare support, especially in the younger grades, exactly where you've put them in this budget. So just an acknowledgement that I know all the people working on that committee are grateful and excited to see that one of the strongest recommendations emerging from the work is materializing this year in the budget. So I'm glad that you're able to support that. The question is, you've done yeoman's work pulling together a bunch of funds to help close the gap this year. Some of it is recurring. So some of these are grants that may continue to be available in the future. Some of these are sort of use of one-time funds. So I'm wondering if you can give us sort of a sense, and I'm supportive of the choice you're making, but just so we're aware, what would you categorize in the funding that you use to kind of fill the gap here as sort of one-time funds that we're going to have to be really conscious of in future budget cycles? And And what do we think is a continued availability that won't put any hindrance on future budgets?
That's a great question, Tom. The ESSER 2 monies, the 271,511, those are one-time funds. However, under the new American Recovery Act, we will be receiving additional, probably about twice as much as that. Now, that is also kind of a one-time fund, but here's what the in the future, the ESSER 3 monies may result and may help us do is down the road next year, may help us to restore some of and replenish some of the school choice funds that we are applying to the budget for next year. But it's the ESSER 2 that really are one time. The Student Opportunity Act, the 137,580. Well, that's part of that particular legislation. And we anticipate there won't be a big windfall for Westford because the Chapter 70 and the foundation budgets depend an awful lot on property values and income levels in communities. So we won't jump from 137,000 to 500,000. It will be a very small incremental increase each year. And as the saying goes, always subject to appropriation. You know, it wasn't funded in this fiscal year, but fortunately it has been funded. You know, school choice we know is recurring. The circuit breaker is recurring, and I'll be glad to talk to those sources of funds with you. But it's generally the ESSER 2 funds that are at risk in terms of continuation. But I think with the recovery laws and bills that are being passed, I do think there'll be some flexibility down the road to provide some leverage against the loss of those funds, and I think we'll be okay in the future.
And Bill, I'm testing my memory here a little bit, but did for the school choice, it looks like we dipped in a little bit deeper. I know we access some of that money every year. It looks like we dug a little bit deeper into that than we typically would, so we'd need to be mindful of that.
Yes, we entered this current fiscal year with just short of $1.2 million in school choice funds. Now that is not fiscal year specific, okay, which is a great benefit to school systems. We're entering fiscal 22, if I consider the receipts that we get this year, with about $500,000 less. We should be entering, and you know, it's plus or minus some dollars, but we should be entering fiscal 22 with about $645,000. So over $500,000 less. So, you know, that's a risk, but I will be proposing to the school committee a few additional school choice placements for next year. We have sort of set a standard of about, or a guideline of about 75 students. We have presently 63 students. So there is a little bit of room, although I have checked with all the principals. Because of the reduction in staff to be more commensurate with our enrollment declines, we're edging up towards 22s and 23s in classrooms where for a number of years we were more in the 20 to 21 category.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks. Christina, and then we'll go to Dennis.
Oh, Dennis can go. Go ahead.
Okay, Dennis.
Oh, you're on mute.
Mute. Dennis, you are on mute. We can't hear.
I want to follow up a little bit on what Tom Clay brought up with regards to some of the impact of grants, particularly in the salary area. There are several references in the questions to the IDEA program, which has been extending to salaries. I have one particular area that I'm kind of interested in, and it's under your budget item number 300. When we're talking about some of the principal salaries, and I listed some of them out in my questions, and there were some very extensive increases. We're talking 30% increases in line item costs from one year to the other. And I just wanted to get a little bit of a clearer understanding from you as to what those particular costs actually involved. Are they bumps to individual salaries, or how are they broken down? Can you explain?
Yes, that's an excellent question, Dennis. I refer to the state function 2210, school leadership. That shows a significant increase. And here's what has happened. And I will show you where that increase is offset by a decrease in another area of the budget. At the present time, each elementary school has a half an assistant principal. Okay, so one person splits their time between Nab and the Abbott, Robinson, Crisafulli, and one person splits their time between the Miller and the Day. We also have 3 student support leaders who have worked in the area of special education, running team meetings, helping with assessments, writing IEPs, etc. What we have decided to do is combine positions, okay, and take and create a position of assistant principal / student support leader. So we have taken the people and the salaries who are currently student support leaders, okay, and those salaries are further down in your budget. And I'll find them in 1 second here for you, Dennis. And those have been reallocated to the 2210 state function. So if you look at the 2315 state function, instructional coordinators, team leaders, that shows a decrease of almost $276,000. Okay. Those people and those salaries have been moved up to the 2210 state function of school leadership. So, and that happens, in several places in the budget where we have moved some people, and we've indicated that we've moved some people from one state function into another state function, and most particularly these student support leaders. So instead of 3 assistant principals that you have right now in the school department budget, next year we will have 6 assistant principals, 1 for each elementary school. The difference there is about $7,000, a little over $7,000, the cost. So it's pretty cost neutral. The benefit is by having one person focusing on administrative and student support functions in each building, they get to know the students better, they get to understand it with families, and we provide more consistent services to the students. So there are great benefits that derive from making that consolidation.
So just to clarify, then, and when we're reading this, then these do not necessarily reflect individual salaries. They're spread out. Is that what it is, over several people?
There are a number of people in the 2210 function. Those are all the school principals, all the current school assistant principals, and now the 3 student support leaders who are now in that administrative function also for next year.
Okay. I got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Christina and Heather.
Thanks. So I had asked a question about the non-general funds, like basically the revolving funds, and to get an estimate on what the balances would be at the end of this year, and then an estimate for next year, because I was trying to put together my own information, and I couldn't find, specifically, I couldn't find what the estimates were for current fiscal 21. Like how much school choice was planned to be used, transportation, parking fees, all of those things.
We will, I thought that was a link that we provided in the questions, and if it's not, I will be glad to provide those to you within the next few days.
Okay, yeah, because it said to be discussed in the answers.
Oh, but Christina, that's because it was asked for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we just need a little more time to put that together for a 5-year span. What we do have is, so we have all the revolving account balances as of March 1st.
Right. I saw those. I guess really what I definitely want my original ask, but I'm trying to wrap my head around fiscal 21 and how that's gonna end. And I couldn't find the original estimates for each of the revolving funds when the budget was put together last year.
Okay, we will,
So if I can get that.
we'll be glad to provide. Christina, we just didn't have time to finish that off to do 5 years. So
Christina,
we
actually,
will,
the girl that does that, her
we are
father
working.
passed away and she's been out of the office. So she's the one that has the handle on that. We just weren't able to pull it all together. We're down a man, actually, we're down a couple of men. So we can pull it together. It's just going to take us a bit.
Sure. Okay. I had one other question on the bus contract. So I know you renegotiated for next year. So what happens in fiscal 23?
The school committee will go back out to bid for fiscal 23.
Okay. Is there an extension in the current contract?
There is an extension. However, that bus bid was bid on a 2-tier system. Now, the bus company, was good enough to negotiate downward for us. They were able to do a 3-tier system and hold their bid for this current year. All right.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't expect them to go a fourth and fifth year when they were asked to bid on a particular number of runs in the budget, and it's double what it was actually bid on. So bus contracts are awarded on a 3-year basis with an option at the exclusive purview of the school committee to approve those. But I've talked with the school committee about that, and we think it's in the best interest, certainly, but also for vendors to sharpen their pencil to go back out to bid after fiscal 22.
Okay. Thanks. I'll let somebody else go.
Mm-hmm. Heather? John. After. Heather,
I'm just going to continue on Christina's revolving fund. I asked the school committee this on their air table and they agreed to look at it, but I just want to reiterate it here. I think it would be wise in the future to have some kind of policy on the use of revolving funds. The 5-year request that Christina just had, I think will help us kind of see if we're accumulating balances on there as opposed to spending them down. So that's the first one. The second one, I have a question on the per pupil spend, which was the last slide in the presentation we saw tonight.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at the budget, I think a lot of us stumble when there's all these offsets and the offsets get changed, in the various line items. I think 3 of us at least asked about the IDEA grant. So when things get net down like that, does that affect the per pupil spend on that last page of your presentation tonight? I think I saw one of the answers that said something like the school choice was used as a custodian offset. So that number gets net down, and then will it affect the per pupil?
That's a great question, because if you remember that question used to come up every year. And I remember Rob, and I can't remember his last name. He used to ask me that question every year in town meeting. The per pupil expenditure, Heather, is derived from the end of the year report from all expenditures from all funds, okay, with the exception of capital and transportation. Okay, so school choice, any state or federal grants, private donations, everything and anything that we bring in as revenue and is expended is considered in that per pupil expenditure. It is not just the general fund appropriation expenses.
So would the custodian amount in that report be net of the school choice number to reflect the revenue, or would it be grossed up to show what your true expense really is?
Well, that whatever we appropriate monies to with school choice program, that is included in the per pupil expenditure figure.
So it would be net,
Mm-hmm.
is what you're saying. Okay. If you don't mind, Harry, I'm just going to keep going through my list.
Please.
Ingrid had said at one point circuit breaker might include transportation. So I'm curious if that was ever resolved or determined by the state?
Not at this point in time, Heather.
And does the same apply with the school choice transportation? Does transportation get counted there?
We're not obligated, and we don't transport school choice students. That's a responsibility of the family.
The only exception to that would be if it was a special education student who was going out of
Right,
district.
Yep.
Then
correct.
that would be factored into the cost, and that's completed in our yearly report that we do for school choice.
So you would get reimbursed for those amounts?
We would, however, for the past 2 years, that transportation has actually been provided by the town itself in which that student resides in. So we don't have to worry about the reimbursement because we're not putting the money out to begin with. The only money that I'm claiming in that particular situation is the tuition itself.
Okay. Last one. Actually, I'm not last one. Last one for you, Bill. Or maybe just even for school committee in general. I think that as we move forward with all the constraints in the budget, we need to think about long-term planning. And I know that we had talked about class sizes, but I'm wondering, particularly at the high school and some of the elective classes, planning space utilization with the drop in students. I think we went from 5,300, now we're at 4,700. So I just ask that kind of gets factored in as we do budgets in future years. I know it won't affect you, Bill.
May I just say that
Yep.
we do scale the staff down. Now, you'll notice there was a decline in numbers of students at the high school. Course registrations will be later this year because of the nature of the school year caused by the pandemic. But one of the difficult aspects of when we cut electives at the high school, or if we were to cut electives, sometimes have the full-time staff who are teaching core area subjects also teach those electives. And so if we cut some of those, does that mean a very quality full-time staff member needs to go down to either a 0.8 or a 0.6 full-time equivalency, in which case we may lose that staff member. So there's a lot of complicating factors, but we do try to scale down staffing and materials and supplies commensurate with enrollment, either increases or decreases.
So my last question is actually for the school committee members, I guess. And I'm just wondering if they go through the list of questions that Fincom submits, because I think that sometimes there's some really good questions in there that might just jar someone to think a little bit differently about something. I know we read theirs.
Yeah, I know the school committee has thoroughly reviewed all of those questions, Heather. And please know that my job and the next superintendent's job also, along with the finance department people and Kerry, our jobs are to look how we can leverage ourselves financially, given the town's available resources and given the alternative revenues that we have, the revolving accounts, to bring about stability of programming in the future. If you talk with our staff, one of the most important things to them over the last 10 to 15 years has been the stable nature of our improvement in the school system, and not the sawtooth effect of, we increase our budget a lot when times revenues are robust. We don't do that because then we know we have to cut back even more deeply in cyclical downturns, which we've experienced in the last couple of years. So we look very carefully 2 and 3 years out in terms of what are the various sources of revenues, projecting those out, and how do we leverage our position in multiple years in the future.
Heather, can I move to John? Okay, John?
Yes. Hey, Bill, I'm referring to the answers that you gave regarding the grant 240 IDEA, saying that the shift was made as an administrative decision. Could you shed some light on what led to that decision?
Yes, John, I think it's more transparent for everyone to see. And it's easier for us to plan from one fiscal year to the next when we have that idea grant money concentrated in one area. We, up until fiscal 22, and during fiscal 21, I should say, we have 11 teachers and 16 teacher assistants being paid out of the idea grant. We made a decision because it's hard to see that and ferret that out for you and others in the budget. We made a decision, first of all, for transparency purposes, to offset the school tuition account, the outside placement account, with that idea grant. And we also wanted to make sure that salaries of staff members were not necessarily dependent upon grants. Something, to the point of Tom's question a while back is, it's a little bit dangerous to have salaries dependent upon grants that we don't know what the magnitude of the grant is going to be from one year to the next. So two different reasons there, John.
Yeah, that was one I was guessing that maybe the salaries were outstripping the amount of the grant. The other questions on maintenance. You have $115,000 in your maintenance and operations additional, and you talked about 20-some years that you haven't been able to maintain the facilities the way you'd like to. Could you kind of shed some light on what that $115,000, what types of maintenance are you looking at for that $115,000?
That will be for certainly for materials and supplies, but also for some maintenance contracts in terms of HVAC equipment, mostly maintenance related supplies, plumbing, heating, carpentry supplies, but also for repairs from contractors that sometimes requires a rather sophisticated commercial electrician's license to work on some areas of our schools. So what we're looking to do, as I said, is try to get it into a more preventive mode instead of a corrective mode of maintenance.
Okay, just to follow up that, it sounds a lot like the potential for combining with some of the town maintenance contracts and things like that. Now, I know according to the charter and state law, the schools are responsible for their own operations and maintenance. But I just wonder if you're looking at that for the future of maybe trying to combine the contracts to get a little bit more leverage with the town and the school cooperating in that area.
Yes, we talked about that with Jody and Eric. We talked about that with Paul Fox, the facilities director. I do believe we have a joint elevator contract now, and wherever we can join the town, we will. I know for years, we used to have the town participate in our supplies bid. And so we're always willing to cooperate, and Jody is also, to save whatever money we can.
Okay, thank you.
Anita?
I have a question related to town and school safety task force and the inclusion of the social adjustment counselors. And I was just wondering, this is, I guess, a process question, because those didn't make its rounds for like community input and approval, right, from select board and school committee, or did those get approved and I just missed it?
Anita, my primary reason for including those positions in the budget, and I cited the town and school safety task force conversations, but I've met with teachers at all levels for years before I put the budget together. In the last 3 years, I have never heard more teachers comment about the social, emotional, and mental health needs of our students, even down to the very earliest grade levels. And so I didn't necessarily have the money in fiscal 21, but with the Student Opportunity Act money, which is the additional Chapter 78, the 137,580, I was able to do that. In addition, that was supplemented, if you'll notice in the line items under the guidance section, there's 137,580 plus about 22,000. The 22,000 is 10% of the ESSER 2 monies, the $271,711 that is coming in from the federal government. At least 10% of that has to be spent, or 10,000, we devoted 10% of that grant towards mental health issues. So, the TSS TF discussions were kind of supportive in nature, but that was not the primary linchpin upon which I am budgeting the 2.5 adjustment councils. It's my direct conversations with our staff who are saying, we need help.
Okay, that's helpful. And I guess I'm just wondering, and I don't know all of the recommendations of TSSTF, but were there other school-related ones that would be considered for next year? Or like, I'm kind of just wondering what happens with the process now with those recommendations.
Tom, are you going to respond to that, or?
Yeah, I can respond, or Scott, I can respond. Maybe I'll get started and Scott can correct me. But yeah, absolutely. We have not come, the committee itself has not finalized the recommendations. We haven't done the community conversations that we're planning to do to get public input. And obviously we haven't brought the recommendations forward yet. So my comments of support was more that some of the same things we're seeing, I think Bill was seeing independently as he put forward. So, I think people on that committee would be very happy to see those there. But yeah, nothing would stop the schools from seeing the same need independently and pursuing it. And you will have a chance to see through the whole formal process all the recommendations of that committee. And we hope to have that sort of emerge and be complete over the next, say, 3 to 6 months.
Okay, I mean, I definitely am not opposed to it. I definitely support mental health of our students, but I just got a little bit confused with the process. Thank you.
Dennis?
Yep. Just a quick follow-up question, Bill, with regard to obviously the issues involving special education. You always do a very good job of making a presentation, breaking things down. And I was wondering, I know it won't be you, but maybe you can pass it on to your predecessor, the person following you, that if we could get a breakdown, for example, per grade, per need, and what resources are committed to each, so we have a better understanding of how this thing is developing a little bit, I think it would be a very, very important thing to do for us. And the other thing the questions I have for you are with regard to the IPs and the state standards regarding qualifications for the programs. Have there been any changes in the criteria within recent months or years in regards to bumping individuals into that eligibility or not? Have there been any modifications at all to the mandate?
Into special education, Dennis?
Yeah.
To my knowledge, and Courtney, you could be more precise perhaps than I, but I'm not aware of any changes.
Sure, we haven't had any changes in terms of eligibility guidelines. That has remained quite consistent. Certainly, we've seen an uptick in the amount of students who are requiring more complex needs, both medical and on the autism spectrum. So we do see that. There are also other unfunded mandates that have come down recently that do affect us. And those include our partnerships with the Department of Children and Families, DCF, as well as Department of Mental Health, DMH. So if somebody else were to make a placement for a student based on where the child's parent would reside, we might also be on the hook in terms of fiscal responsibility. There are other unfunded mandates, such as the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Act and our obligation to foster care children to make sure that they remain in their school of origin to the best of their abilities. So, for example, transportation costs in some years, not particularly this past year, have skyrocketed because we have had to go and pick students up and bring them back to Westford so that they are remaining with their classroom teachers in the school that they have been in for a number of years. Of no fault of their own, they became involved with DCF. The same type of situation is true for the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Act. When a family finds themselves on hard times and becomes homeless, the obligation is for us to go get our students, bring them back to the school of origin.
And the last question I have, Bill, is I think you mentioned, can you explain what was the state act that required the increase in nursing staff?
Yes, Dennis. That is, give me 1 second here.
That's through the Department of Public Health, and that's under the medication delegation program. And so in order for us to qualify for the medication delegation, they take a look at the ratios of student to nurse in our highest school. Obviously for us, the highest population is Westford Academy. And so they're looking for the student to nurse ratio to determine whether we qualify for the medication delegation.
Yeah, the last question is on the issue about the severe physical disability. Is there any opportunity for Medicare to be involved with that, to pick up that cost at all, or is it just on us?
Dennis, on some of those costs, and some of the costs with very heavily medically involved students, we make a claim to the state, and that money does come in. Courtney, do we have about 80,000? Somewhere around there. That goes back to the town's general fund. That does not come back to us.
Okay.
Now, I will tell you, Dennis, just to let you know, because nothing is easy, that the delegation of the administration of medication is 105, CMR 210. It's about 18 pages. Okay, so if you want a copy of that, I'll be glad to I'll scan it and send it to you.
I think I can find it, Bill, but thank you. Okay. Appreciate it.
Okay. I have a couple of simple questions, Bill. The first one is in related to what the Tom has started at the beginning of the thing is about the one-time funds for continuous needs. So do we ever use or a policy of not using one-time funds for continuing needs?
Yeah, we have always tried to avoid that because of the funding cliff. If you remember, under President Obama with the American Rescue and Relief, Recovery and Relief Act, we received about $1 million. We didn't hire any staff, okay, because that was one-time funds. Now, we've used the ESSER 2 monies, the $271,000, because we don't want to deplete the school choice monies. And what we're hoping is down the road with the ESSER 3, with the American Recovery Act funds that Congress just passed and the president signed, that money will allow us in the future to restore some of the school choice monies back into that fund balance. So there's where we need to carefully look at the various sources of money to leverage our position, but make sure we don't work ourselves into a consistent position of using one-time revenues, particularly to fund programs or salaries, because they are not sustainable.
Yep. Thank you, Bill. My second question is, in your presentation, you have indicated $25,000 expenditure for classroom material. And I did a quick math that comes to about $5 per student per year. Is it too little, or again, $5? Well, it's a coffee, right? But I'm not trying to lessen the impact of it, but seems like $25,000 is too little for classroom materials or things like that. But can you tell me an example of where these funds will be used and why they are sufficient?
That's not going to be spread across necessarily all grade levels for all students, Harry. What we're doing is through the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team, we're going to be, before the end of this year, targeting that money at certain grade levels. It could be at the upper elementary level first, could be at the middle school. But we do want to use some of that for our library collections to have a more diverse representation in terms of authors and content. So we know it's only the tip of the iceberg. If I could have afforded to put a 50,000 or 100,000 in there, I would, but we don't have that money right now.
Okay. Just a small extension of that. Do you feel like that particular expenditure is underfunded?
The diversity, equity, and inclusion?
The classroom materials.
It's probably underfunded, to be honest with you, on the DEI materials. But once again, we recognize that we're going to have to prioritize the expenditures. We can't spread it across all grade levels and all disciplines. It's going to have to be targeted. And then we'll hopefully be able to, Dr. Chu and Kerry and others will be able to build upon that in the future.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. So okay, Andrea, you're on mute.
I actually wanted to follow up about Hari's question about DEI and materials. I certainly understand in these budget times that, you know, everything is limited, but I'm wondering if and when the SR3 funds come through, are SR3 funds going to be available in terms of perhaps directing some of that funding to DEI, to materials, and to library and to education? Will that be possible? Do you know?
I think it will be possible, Andrew. We don't have the specific guidelines for that, but the federal government has seemed to loosen up the restriction a little bit. The first CARES Act money required communities and school systems to comply with the supplant versus supplement provision. We could not use that money to take the place of monies that we were obligated to spend on behalf of students. In the monies, they dropped the supplant versus supplement provision. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility, and hopefully the SO3 monies will still have that same regulation.
Okay, I mean, I think, you know, obviously that's something to look at down the line. And I guess, you know, I will simply reiterate, I know what you've heard from Tom and Hari and a few other of us. I mean, obviously, you know, you're using, you know, close to $400,000 of one-time funding this year, you know, and that always makes all of us a little bit nervous when that happens. So, you know, for, you know, next year and future years, I think we need to bear that in mind and actually start to need thinking about, you know, how the positions that we are funding through those one-time funds can continue to remain if we lose the funding and we don't have sufficient funds to replace it. It would be obviously a shame and really quite detrimental if we hired school adjustment counselors and then turn around in a year from now and don't have funding to keep them in place. So for all of the folks, I mean, as soon as we get this budget done, I think, you know, you need to, the school committee and the new superintendent need to start thinking about next year's budget and planning for next year.
Yeah, please keep in mind the bulk of the money to hire the adjustment councils is from the Student Opportunity Act. That's the additional Chapter 70 aid that has been sent to the town and specifically for school system. So it's the 271. It's basically the SO2 monies that is the most vulnerable.
But as we know, I mean, you know, they could take away the school opportunity money. I mean, it didn't get funded last year. It gets funded this year. Who knows what it's going to get funded at next year? So I just think that these are things that we all need to, you know, that we need to bear in mind and look at.
Good point.
Mark?
Yeah, so Bill, thanks to you and your staff for all of this. Just a point of clarification, really back to Hari's question. So the one area, Hari, where you do see where one-time funds were used and funded by other means going in the afterwards was really in computers. So there's a decent amount of, and Heather probably has all of the facts, but there's a decent amount of money that at one point in time went to fund iPads and other computers within the school that are now funded out of capital. And so we do talk to Bill every year about that as we talk about the computer expense within the capital appropriation for the schools. But I just did want to clarify that.
If I could say, I think the Capital Committee has been one of the most valuable committees that I've ever been associated with in the 35 years I've been here. It has done just an absolutely outstanding job.
Yeah, when I said that, thanks, Mark, for heading that. So me bringing that point is not really saying I am either way, but every decision we make in that regard would be a cliff that's looking right. And there are reasonable risks we can take. Again, that's part of us. We are making decisions here is if an appropriate decision needs to be made, yes, that makes sense. Like laptops and iPads, that's a good decision. Hiring a teacher, that probably is never a good decision from one-time funds. It just me, I had to speak what I'm thinking about that. That's where that question came up from. So Christina and then Levi.
I just had a few kind of final comments, at least for myself. One, I just wanted to reiterate what Heather said a while back in the beginning of our meeting about when we see the budget, it's helpful to see gross amounts and then sort of as a second layer, see where the offsets are being applied. Like it was more helpful this year to see those gross figures in that offset column. But when you're comparing year to year, like when you're going back, it would be nice to compare those gross amounts rather than the offset. So that way, when a grant funding gets changed from one salary to, say, supplies, you don't get 5 questions on why this line jumped 30% this year when it really didn't. So just going forward, I think that would be something that I'd like to see. I think it would clarify things. The other thing is there was a memo in your January 25th school committee meeting where you presented the preliminary budget. And there was a lot of other detail in there that it would be kind of nice if that got updated to what this final budget is. I think, there were a couple of sheets that were updated and were in your presentation, but there was some other information in there that was it was very helpful, and I think it's a little out of date now, so it would be helpful to update that.
That was our budget letter of transmittal? Is that what you're referring to, Christine?
It wasn't the transmittal, it was the FY22 preliminary budget.
Okay.
And I can send you a link to that just to make sure that it's...
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm working on the same document you're referring to. Yeah.
Sure. And then the final thing is just, could we get an update for fiscal 21? Just kind of a one-page where you're sitting now that things have kind of settled out now, kids are coming back, there's not so much uncertainty projected out for the end of the year.
Yes, I will let you know that as of the beginning of this week, we have about $1.4 million that is unencumbered and is available. To put that in perspective, that is probably around $800,000 more than we have historically had at this point in the fiscal year. If you remember, because of the great uncertainty, we put a purchasing hold on in late December, and then we have spent less in terms of materials and supplies in some areas. Some of the federal grant monies have allowed us to to purchase some items. So we're actually in a little bit healthier position right now, going into the fourth quarter and to the end of the fiscal year, with the anticipation that hopefully we can return some money to the town and help leverage the entire town, help the town leverage its position for all town departments, including us.
That would be great. Thanks, Bill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Levi?
Yeah, thank you, Bill, for putting all those things together. And I have just kind of, open-ended question. So primarily looking forward to the future, right? And we know that for this year, last year, budget has been always tight, right? And looking forward, it will continue to be difficult, right? That's one aspect. Another aspect, we know that, the student enrollment, instead of from the peak 5,300, right now it's at the 4,700 level.
Mm-hmm.
And according to my analysis, the enrollment will continue to go down in a not so insignificant number, could go down to something like 4,300 in 4 years ballpark. So that's another, big picture, right? And another thing I always heard that there's also a need to have a new admin building right? Which requires additional space, additional funding, right? So given the overall, town school budget, given the enrollment, and given the admin building, this demand, so how do we tackle that, in a proactive way, right? This is just open-ended. And in specific, any comments? Is there any possibility, we change one of the school to be admin building, given that it could potentially save some money, and given that the student enrollment is not as high as it used to be? 4,300, if in a couple of years, if it go down to, 4,300, that level, 1,000 less than the peak, or maybe say close to 20% and less than the peak, is there a possibility, by combining the school together, potentially not only free up the space for the admin, but also potentially consolidate some of the function?
That's a very good point. And that's something we're looking very careful at. I'm going to be meeting with Dr. Chu about reconvening the Space Needs Subcommittee. The enrollment is always intriguing. And I always, I've been working in demographics for almost 40 years now, even back to when I was in the Lowell School Department. What's intriguing is the number of births in town is down from a high of about 310 back about 15, 16 years ago to an average of about 130 to 140 births per year. We know the birth rate is down across the nation. What the interesting part is that we're trying to match that with the in-migration, out-migration in Westford. To talk with some of the real estate agents, which I have, they say, we don't have enough stock to sell based on the demand, and houses are going for $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 more than the asking price because of the supply and demand phenomenon. So that's something, that in-migration, out-migration factor we have to keep a careful look at. What's nice is the Hanover properties. We were taking 49 students out of there, as I projected, I think over 200 a few years ago. But because of the nature of that property and the cost, it's mostly empty nesters and young professionals and retirees, although we are taking 49 students. So there are so many issues that are very interesting that feed into demographic analysis. But we are going to have to take a look. If there's a sustained decline in enrollment, we will need to take a look at the number of facilities that we have in the school system.
Maybe a quick follow-up. Is there any serious consideration, potentially maybe reduce the number of schools by one, or maybe it's just not, just some open discussion so far?
Well, we're constantly looking at the enrollments in various schools, and if we have to close a school, I mean, in another 2 or 3 or 4 years, that will happen. We just don't know that with certainty. Our kindergarten enrollment is fairly stable right now. It was declining, but it's been relatively stable for the last couple of years. Between births and 5 years later, the cohort survival ratio is 1.67, meaning for every child born in Westford, 1.67 children show up in kindergarten 5 years later. So we have to keep an eye on that because that enrollment will tend to follow through the grade levels. But there are a number of issues we're going to look at, and the next superintendent will look at with a space needs subcommittee to see if we can scale down the number of facilities in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, Heather? Yes.
I just wanted to stand behind Li Wei because I did send a letter to the selectmen a while ago. I didn't really hear back, and I sent it to building committee. I think that's something important to consider in the future. I mean, the budget's tight. It's going to be tight forever, and just adding buildings really sucks up the operating costs, and we just don't have those funds.
Yep, always a legitimate point in terms of looking at buildings, whether you're increasing enrollment or declining enrollment.
Okay, so any other questions for Bill tonight? Okay, so that wraps the review of school committee budgets today. Bill is expected to appear back 2 weeks from now for any follow-up questions or any other agenda items. Okay.
But once again, thank you for the thoroughness of your review. You know, this is the last call for me, and I've always been impressed with finance committees and selectmen in terms of what you bring to the budget review process for all budgets, including ours. So, thank you again.
Tom?
I think we should have a cake with 35 candles on it. Let's want to give a round of applause to Bill. Thanks, Bill.
Diet, Tom.
35 years.
He would be happy to see only 35 on the cake.
I'm not sure any of the fire suppression systems would hold 35 candles properly.
Yeah, well, at my age, you know, if I put all the candles on a cake, it'll look like a 3-alarm fire. All right, look forward to seeing you on April 8th.
Thank you, Bill. Always
Great
a pleasure.
see you then.
Okay, so select board stay on for the next one. We'll approve the meetings agenda, and then you can go. So the next item on the agenda is 8:35, approval of minutes of March 11th. So has everybody seen those things and any amendments or motion to approve? John?
Yes, under your paragraph, fire department 220 and ambulance enterprise, I was not at that meeting with the fire chief. I made the one with the police chief, but not the one with the fire chief.
Okay.
It's awful quiet.
Okay. Any other amendments to the minutes? Okay. Can someone from finance committee make a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Second.
Second. Okay. I will go through Dennis. We didn't hear you. You're on mute, I think. Yep. Christina?
Yes.
Beth?
Aye.
Hari? Aye. Levi?
Aye.
John?
Yes.
Jake?
Aye.
Heather?
Aye.
Can someone from Selectmen?
I'll do it. All right, someone want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. Second.
There's a second? Okay, all those in favor, Tom?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye.
Anita?
Aye.
Mark?
Abstain.
And I'll vote aye. And then for the select board, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
A second? Folks, just raise your hands. All right, unanimous. Good night, guys. Good to see you. We'll see you next week.
Yeah, good night.
Bye.
Night.
Okay, so, well, we have a grand agenda to discuss the next meetings, which is on April 1st and April 8th. So anything other than that, if anybody else have anything else off the agenda? Otherwise, anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
I make the motion to adjourn.
Thanks, John. I was a little worried that all of us want to stay here. Thanks, Heather. Second. Okay, let's go down. Dennis? Okay. Christina?
Aye.
Beth?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Levi?
Aye.
John?
Yes.
Jake?
Aye.
Heather?
Yes.
Okay, that concludes the budget review of WPS on March 25th, 2021. The Finance Committee meeting is adjourned.
Good night, everybody. Be safe. Take care.